If you like to make your NFL games a little bit more interesting, you've come to the right place. It's the Even Money Podcast with Ross Tucker and Steve Fezzik.
Yeah, Vegas, baby, Vegas. It is the Even Money Podcast. We are, of course, presented by DraftKings. The crown is yours. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman. Most of you know that now. 5 teams, 7 years, long time ago. Those of you checking us out, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL. You can see the helmets behind me, the game balls, the whole deal. Awesome temp job in my 20s, primarily because it enabled me to get these broadcasting gigs with CBS and the Eagles and Westwood One, as well as host all these podcasts. College draft is on fire right now, getting everybody ready for the NFL draft. Emory was at the Combine the entire time, so we went all over that on the College Draft Show. Speaking of that, on the Ross Tucker Football Podcast on Wednesday, we'll have Greg Cosell a day earlier to get his thoughts from the Combine. So we're basically doubling down on the Combine. We got the Fantasy Feast this week. Today, here on the Even Money Betting Podcast, we've got a couple different things we want to talk about. Number one, some NFL stuff. Best way to evaluate how good a team is or isn't, as well as the best way to attack the offseason NFL betting and why Steve does it that way. And then college football. How about our friends over at DraftKings? I already have all these season win total numbers out. I'm looking at them. It's amazing. It's like a beautiful thing to see season win total numbers already. We'll get into that. Steve actually has 2 best bets as it relates to college football. The Steve I'm referring to, of course, is Steve Fezzik. He's at Fezzik Sports on social media. He's the only 2-time winner ever of the Super Contest at the Westgate. You can check him out on social media at Fezzik Sports. You guys know you can check me out at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. Steve, always good to see you. Always good to talk with you. I finally realized, you finally told me why you wear a cutoff shirt on this show. You're trying to do like a Pat McAfee impression?
Well, I could do a lot worse, right? No, I just feel Pat McAfee I did this before McAfee, and so he's kind of justifying the lazy look that I utilize, yes.
All right. So let's start with some NFL stuff before we get to the college football and hopefully get to an email question. Ross at rosstucker.com, by the way, for that. Remember, if you ever take advantage of any of our sponsors, especially DraftKings, email me, ross at rosstucker.com. We can probably get your question asked the very next episode if you got something that you've been thinking about. All right. You wanted to start, Steve. You and I were texting about today's show about the best way to evaluate teams and that not enough people recognize that it's not their win-loss number.
Yeah, so looking at the standings from the year before makes sense, but looking at the point differential makes more sense because the bottom line, you get a whole bunch of close games. I get it. Mahomes is God, and he manages to will his team to victory. But the bottom line, just in terms of power rating wise, how good a team is, I want to look at point differential. So I look at Kansas City plus 59, Baltimore plus 157, Ross. Baltimore was a much better team than Kansas City last year during the regular season. It doesn't carry over necessarily to the playoffs, but going forward, very likely I'll have Baltimore power rated above Kansas City again, just like I did last year.
Okay. So this is a very interesting conversation. And I know that this is how you and the people that set the lines look at it and the professional bettors. So I guess I would say this, Steve. The goal is to win the game. The goal is to not score as many points as possible or win by as many points. And I guess I feel like with certain teams and certain players and coaches, we have a big enough sample size now, a big enough track record that there are teams that win more than their fair share of the games, of close games, like the Chiefs, way more, obviously. And then there are teams that don't, like the Ravens. Just like there are teams and players and coaches that play their best when it matters the most, like Mahomes and like Jalen Hurts to some extent. And there are players that don't, like Lamar Jackson. I mean, it's a pretty decent sample size now. I'm not saying it's going to continue forever. So while I understand why you have it pegged that way, who do you think would have won if the Chiefs played the Ravens in the playoffs?
I think it could have gone either way. I certainly would not have bet on Lamar Jackson because of all the reasons that you cited. That's why you have to make an adjustment in come playoff time to your power ratings. But all I worry about right now is week one power ratings, Ross. Power ratings in the playoffs in 2025, I'll make adjustments then. Right now, I'm just trying to pick winners to start the season, and Baltimore's better than Kansas City.
Okay, so then the next question there is, they are better because they scored more points or won by more in the games that they won, even though they won less games.
Yes, and you could make a case for being cautious when Baltimore plays a Kansas City during the regular season even, and make the case that, hey, when Baltimore, they're a better bowlie. So when they play Carolina, they're more likely to smash Carolina than Kansas City is, and that's a valid case. And maybe we need to have two separate power ratings, one for games where you're playing a team that's comparable to you, and one where you're playing a team that's far inferior.
Okay, so because that's interesting to me, I look at the Ravens as, and that point differential, I feel like it's a lot of empty calories. It's a lot of like beating up on teams when they're already up by 2 scores. I called the game for CBS, Steve. They lost to the Browns. Like, the Chiefs aren't losing to the Browns. That's not happening, you know? So ultimately, in terms of your power ratings, what does that really mean? You know, if you're going to say, because of the point differential, okay, you're going to have the Ravens rated higher than the Chiefs, well, then you're going to lose, Steve, when it's those 1 or 2 games a year where the Ravens play down to their competition and they lose. Whereas, and maybe you'll lose on the other end because you'll pick the Chiefs to lose. They're not going to, the Chiefs aren't losing to the Browns. They're not losing to a team like that.
So maybe be a little more cautious in Baltimore playing money lines and the like, and they're not as adept at winning the close games. Hey, but the bottom line is if they're going to finish plus 157 again, they're going to be covering plenty of games because they'll be a bully and they'll be beating up on teams. And ultimately, they have to cover if they're going to be plus 157 in the majority of their games.
Right. Okay. That makes sense that they're covering a lot if their point differential's that high. I think that's a good distinction between, you know, spread and money line for sure when it relates to the Ravens. Were there any other good examples of that this past year, Steve? Anybody else that jumped out to you? What was like the Eagles point differential or the Lions?
Well, the Eagles and Lions were awesome, but they had a great record. So they across the board. You want to look at a team, look at the Rams. Rams almost went to the Super Bowl. Rams were minus 19. That's kind of shocking that they got, outscored for the season. And Tampa Bay, the Bucks were plus 117. That shocked me. So Tampa Bay really, that they were plus 100, as were the Chargers, as was Denver. I think we got to asterisk the Denver game, though, because they did beat Kansas City 38-0. I don't even know if we should put that into the data.
No, you should not. That's interesting. So would you say here, Steve, that you think the Bucks are a better team or a much better team than the Rams?
Oh, no. I wouldn't say that, but I would say...
You said the Bucks were plus 100 some, and you said the Rams were minus.
I did, but
What's
the Rams
are between that and Ravens Chiefs?
Yeah, but I think that the Rams are perceived to be significantly, I could be wrong, but I think the Rams are perceived to be better than the Bucks, and I would put them in the same category. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the market will embrace both teams equally this year.
Got it. Okay. All right, so let's take then the next step, Steve, which is you do the numbers based a lot on point differential. That helps you arrive at your power ratings. You feel like you're getting an edge looking at point differential as opposed to one loss record. And then are you just sitting here waiting for when the win totals get dropped and when they start to have selective games? Because all I remember last offseason is, we did the win totals a couple times, and like on a weekly basis, you would look at bets you liked in week 1, bets you liked in week 2.
Absolutely. One thing that I was looking back that I was really frustrated by is I had so many Eagles bets in games of the year. I love the Eagles, and they didn't do very well because they dropped the first month. I was going through the games of the year, I went chronologically, and the Eagles didn't do well the first 6 weeks. So I had like 8 games of the year on the Eagles, and I started like 1-3-1 on the first 5. So that was frustrating.
Wow, that's interesting. Yes, they got off to a really poor start. People were calling for Sirianni to be fired, and then they didn't lose again when they had Hurts. I mean, they lost one game to the Commanders, and that's when Hurts got hurt 6 minutes into the game. So that is interesting. Do you recall, Steve, when those season win totals and bets of the year start to come out?
Usually it's right after the draft because the uncertainty of the draft, you got to know who the likely quarterback is to set lines typically. So that's when it's you've got a pretty good feel at that point for what's going on.
Big fan of Smirnoff because they're a big fan of this show. They're an official sponsor of the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, not to mention official vodka partner of the NFL and Super Bowl 59. For me, Smirnoff is a delicious change-up. You guys know I enjoy beer. Guess what? If I'm having vodka, I'm having Smirnoff because you can drink it without breaking the bank. Plus, they have all those hand-picked items at SmirnoffDrops.com, which is awesome. There's a lot of things they do that are Smirnoff extraordinary. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff number 21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Pricing is at the sole discretion of the retailer. May vary by state. Please not share with anyone under legal drinking age. Smirnoff, we do game days. Got it. Okay, yeah, I would expect that too. And then it's usually May now that the schedule comes out, right? I know we know who the teams are playing. We just don't know all of the, schedule differential stuff, rest differential, the stuff that we bring on Warren Sharp to talk about.
And sometimes they leak a few games beforehand and they start putting lines up. That's happened just before the schedule is released. But obviously, I need the schedule to be able to set the lines. Yes.
Okay, so you were texting me. I would not have known this until you let me know that the college football season win totals are out. Is this normal, or is this DraftKings just getting way ahead of the game?
I think getting way ahead of the game. This is as early as I've seen it. And shout out to Brad Powers, who was the first one that spotted it. And he was discussing several of the games. I always tell Brad there was a movie called Death Wish. Do you remember Death Wish? Probably not, Ross.
No.
Way before your time. Charles Bronson, he's a mercenary, but his name, Paul Kersey is his name. And the police know he's like this mercenary killer. And they're like, we'll be watching you very closely, Mr. Kersey. So I always tell Brad Powers, I'll be watching you very closely, Mr. Powers, whenever he makes any recommendations on early college football betting.
So I think it's interesting that I didn't hear about this, Steve, or I didn't know about it. Not that I follow it as closely as you, but do you think, like in any way, do you think maybe it's just because college hoops is going to be big right now and NBA is big right now, or do you think that they kind of do a soft, quiet launch to let the market settle a little bit before they really go out and really start to, promote that they got their college football season win totals up?
Ooh, that's a good point. Because obviously March Madness is king, and that's where we're going to see so much action. And they didn't put up every team; they just put up, the big conference teams. So, that could well be the case. One thing I love about DraftKings is, unlike other books, when they put up a number, and it's more difficult to get down, and some people are limited, but it tends to stay up there for quite a long time. And they'll take a lot of bets without moving the number, which is really cool. And ultimately, if you're able to bet at DraftKings, and we recommend it here on Even Money, most of you can indeed, go ahead and make a wager. It might be a limited wager and get down on the bet.
Got it. So, by the way, when is the conference tournament? Is all that stuff next week?
The lesser conferences, the conference tournaments are going on right now. So I'll give a best bet here. There's a horrible team, Wisconsin Green Bay, coached by Doug Gottlieb, who has 2 full-time jobs, and they've had a terrible season. And I think this is a Dr. Bob trend. So Wisconsin Green Bay has won 10% of their conference games. They're catching 11.5 today in a conference tournament game on the horizon. I think that's a good bet on Wisconsin Green Bay.
Wow. You're taking Wisconsin Green Bay and the points.
In their final game of the year, it's time to circle the wagons.
Gonna post on social at some point, but I just got 5 cases of Labatt and Labatt Blue Light. So I can now get involved at Buy Beer, Get Gear from Labatt, where you just go to their website, snap a photo of the receipt, upload it instantly to rack up points for exclusive merch. You get points for every purchase, any store, bar, or stadium, any size, any product, anywhere you're buying Labatt. Buy beer, get gear. Go to rewards.labattusa.com to sign up. While we're on it, before we get back to the college football, are there any other tips you have for conference tournament betting? I mean, we can hit it harder next week when the bigger conferences are rolling, but anything else you have maybe for these smaller conferences?
I just mentioned, play the terrible teams, look to play on them, because the Miami of Floridas, the Canisises, they've had nothing to play for all year long. They're probably going to bring it their first game. Historically, those teams have done very well against the spread, teams with terrible conference records in their first game. And secondly, in terms of the totals, I would look towards first half unders, second half overs. Why? Teams are tight. The games are big. Win or go home. And so they tend to play very tight, but they don't give up. They tend to foul to the bitter end in the second half.
Got it. Okay. So those are some good tips for the conference basketball tournament, some of which are going on this week and weekend, and the rest will be on next week and weekend. And then next Sunday, not this Sunday, but next Sunday is Selection Sunday, right?
Yes.
It's interesting how popular. Do you think college basketball, you think March Madness, how much of the popularity is because of betting versus just like the tournament nature of it, or just that people love brackets? I mean, I know it's all of that. It's just interesting.
It's the brackets. It's the fact that even if you're not betting, you are betting, because everybody fills out a bracket or 2 or 10. And so that engages everyone. And I got to be honest, back when I worked in corporate America as a vice president, the one time of the year I would play hooky while I was working is I would tell my secretary, I'm in a meeting for 2 hours on Thursday and Friday. And I take the dash downtown. I go to an Irish pub there, and I would actually have a beer and watch an hour and a half of college basketball action. That was the only time of the year, which shows, I don't think I'm alone there, that engagement.
Guess what? My deal with my parents from, I don't know, maybe 3rd grade through like 8th grade, or certainly 7th grade. No, certainly 6th grade. If I had straight A's, I was able to stay home the first day of the tournament. I loved it that much. And a lot of times I think maybe they let me stay home both days. That's just good parenting right there. Good, solid parenting. All right, let's get back to the college football. We got plenty of time next week. Really, the next 2 weeks, we're going to talk a lot of college hoops betting. Get you ready for the conference tournaments, as well as next week, since Selection Sunday is next Sunday, Steve. We got to get people ready for what to do right when the right when the bracket's released, because we won't talk to them until the Tuesday after. So we can give bracket advice the Tuesday after, but next week we got to make sure they know what bets to make right when it comes out, right when March Madness comes out. Looking at the season win totals, Steve, I'm looking, they don't have them all up. It looks like they have, for season win totals, college football, it looks like they have about 20 of them up, I'm seeing. It's not like you can bet on Bowling Green right now with their coach leaving and now those kids can all transfer. There are game lines, though, that are up. Iowa State, K-State, Nebraska, Cincinnati. Alabama's laying 9.5 against Florida State on Saturday, August 30th. Then you've got the Heisman Trophy, the favorite, Arch Manning from Texas. A lot of guys listed for the Heisman Trophy. There's futures bets to win the college football playoff. Ohio State favored again. Boy, I don't see that at all. Not at all. They lost everybody. That's bananas to me. And then we got the season win totals. So I love it. We don't get a chance to talk nearly as much college football betting on this show as I'd like to, probably primarily because there's so much NFL and because we talk college football betting on the College Draft podcast all the time with Emory. What do you got for me, Steve?
So I got
best
two
way
best.
to attack it.
We're going to go two best bets. We're going to go.
Well, hold on a second. Step back. Before you go to the best bets, with what's out right now, game lines, awards, futures, wins, best way to attack college football betting.
Oh, I think you can attack the games of the year also, but the season wins. I love the season wins. I think it's too early on the awards. You see the vagaries of, who's going to win the Heisman and based upon key performances in September and October. I know there's diamonds in the rough. I lack the acumen to find them. So I focus on the games of the year, but most importantly, the season wins. Let me explain why the season wins are so good. Ross, if you can spot a team that's a game off on their season wins, like you think they're going to win 8 and they're lined at 7, you don't have an edge. You have an enormous edge. I mean, you're going to win 70% of those bets. And if you look at the really high season win numbers, if you can just find a team that's lined a half game too high, you're staring at literally like a 65%, 70% bet just by getting an extra half game on a team that might be really good. Maybe they should win 10, but if they're lined at 10.5, it's a no-brainer to go under.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. What do you got for me?
All right, 2 of them. You're going to like the first one. I can tell right now. The Ohio State Buckeyes, with 15 guys potentially heading to the draft. They're at 10.5, minus 120 to the under. Ross, they open up against Texas. They're only a small favorite in that game. They got to play Penn State. They got to play at Wisconsin. They have to play Michigan. I mean, it is asking a lot for these Buckeyes to be able. They only won 10 games last year, and now they're at 10.5, under 10.5.
Wow. And that's just regular season, right? Doesn't include anything in the postseason.
That's right. Doesn't include the Big Ten championship game.
What's your other one?
The other one is Texas, under 10.5, minus 180. I know it's a lot of vig, but it's going to win. So, I mean, think about this. Texas plays Ohio State week 1. Loser must leave town, like the old Georgia championship wrestling matches. It's like Kevin Sullivan's going to have to go back to Boston after he loses to Austin Idol. You're going to have to run the table if you lose this game. So good luck running the table, Texas. If you're at Florida, at Kentucky, Arkansas, at Mississippi State, Oklahoma, at Georgia, Texas A&M, are you kidding me? I mean, this team's going to win 9 or 10 games. So I know you're laying minus 180, but you know what? You don't pay the vig when you win. So both Ohio State under and Texas under 10.5.
Ooh, I love it. Juicy. The fact they play each other in the first game is a great call, although one of them does have to win that game too. So that's the other way to look at it.
I still think if Texas wins, they're not going to get there. So I'm rooting for Texas to beat Ohio State.
All right, we love getting to an email question, especially for those of you who take advantage of any of our sponsors. This is from Anthony Fiato. Steve, would you advise a recreational bettor there's more value in season-long plays like make-miss playoffs, over-under win totals, than individual games week to week during the season. I found great value on many of the win total plays that have moved the full game since the openers came out. I think you basically just answered this talking about college football, Steve. You basically just answered Anthony. That's amazing timing. He said, would you approve of a higher percentage of bankroll reserved for football futures compared to week?
So this is the rare case where I'll give the same advice to the pro bettors as I do the recreational bettors. The pro bettors bet the season wins. Why? If your handicap is correct, you're going to win. So think about baseball. Baseball's 162 games. If you think that if your handicap is that a certain team is going to be worse than expected or better than expected, if you think Baltimore is going to be lousy and you bet under 89 wins and you're right, you're going to win, because even a few unlucky bounces of the ball won't matter in the long term if your handicap is correct. However, for the recreational bettor, it's a different reason. Maybe you're not picking winners. Think about the excitement and the action. I'll use an example. Last year, there was a team, Louisiana Tech. Their season win number was 5 to 5.5. They wound up winning 5. They lost on missed chip field goals. They lost on Hail Marys. It was the wildest ride you will ever experience. Go back and recap the Louisiana Tech week-by-week experience. If you don't think that's exciting and their end games, you just weren't following it, because it was incredible. Every La Tech game seemingly came down to the final minute.
Absolutely love it. Good luck, everybody. Hope you guys win some money.
Thanks for tuning in to Even Money. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Fantasy Feast, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.